Welcome to Sonara's Deep Dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. You've brought us quite a fascinating set of sources today. We're really diving straight into the heart of Native North American spiritual practices.
That's the plan. We're looking at the Lakota, the Iroquois, the Pueblo peoples, trying to understand how these incredibly rich spiritual traditions developed and, importantly, how they've persisted.
Right, persistence seems key here. So our mission today is really to explore that historical development, but also the sheer endurance of faith, especially when facing, well, immense historical pressures.
Exactly. This isn't just about recounting history. It's about understanding survival through adaptation. These sources, they really show how distinct tribal traditions managed to hold on to and even redefine their spiritual identities.
How are we going to approach that? What are the main threads we'll follow?
We'll look at it through a couple of lenses. First, the really intense personal power you see in prophetic movements. We'll contrast figures like Black Elk and Handsome Lake, quite different figures, different contexts. And second, we'll explore the maybe more subtle but equally powerful language of resistance found in things like art, architecture, and healing rituals. How culture itself becomes a tool for maintaining identity.
That idea of resilience, it seems like it starts right at the foundation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Looking across the sources, there's this shared core concept around wellness, around healing.
Absolutely. Before you even get to specific deities or rites, you have to grasp their understanding of health. It wasn't compartmentalized like we often think of it today. Healing was profoundly holistic. Meaning it aimed for total harmony, spiritual, mental, physical, all interconnected. You couldn't really separate them.
So illness wasn't just a bug or a broken bone.
Rarely just that. It was often seen as stemming from a loss of balance. That could be within the individual, sure, but also within the community or even with the natural environment. Or sometimes, from external forces, negative energies, perhaps social conflict disrupting harmony.
If your mind is troubled, your body feels it, your spirit weakens, that kind of connection.
Precisely. And the way to address that discord, that imbalance, that's where ritual comes in.
Ah, okay. Ritual as the mechanism.
Yes, ritual is the engine driving harmony. It's how you quiet the mind, how you block out the negativity, the noise, and how you access the spiritual world directly. It's fundamental.
And we see this in really powerful, life-shaping practices described in the sources.
Definitely. Take the Lakota Vision Quest, the Hanbo Chia. You have an individual, often a young person, seeking guidance, going out alone, fasting, isolating themselves, usually on a high place.
It sounds incredibly intense.
It is. And the goal isn't just quiet thought. It's a deliberate effort to reach a spiritual state, a state of openness where a wakan, a spirit being, might appear.
Often as an animal.
Very often. And that animal then becomes a kind of lifelong spiritual guardian or guide. It's deeply personal.
And that contrasts with something like the sun dance.
Yeah.
Which is more communal.
Right. The sun dance is a major collective ceremony. It's about renewal, sacrifice, and reaffirming the connection between the entire community, the cosmos, and the great spirit, Wakan Tanka. It's incredibly demanding physically and spiritually, but it strengthens the whole group.
So these core practices, the vision quest, the sun dance, they form the bedrock, the sort of indigenous theology that later leaders would build upon or react against.
Exactly. They establish the fundamental relationship with the sacred. But before we get too deep into those later prophets and movements, we really need to talk about the sources themselves.
Okay, yeah. Let's put on our critical hats here, because how we know these things matters hugely, starting with probably the most famous text, Black Elk Speaks.
It's a monumental book, published in 1932, hugely influential. But its status is also why it's, well, kind of problematic for historians and cultural scholars.
It tells the story of Black Elk, right? An Oglala Lakota holy man.
Yes, and he lived through an incredibly traumatic time. He was at the Little Bighorn as a boy, survived the Wounded Knee Massacre. His life spanned this period of immense upheaval and loss. The book covers his life and his powerful visions.
Visions that were incredibly significant.
Hugely. It inspired people worldwide. Even figures like Carl Jung were fascinated by it. But the controversy, it really hinges on how the book was made.
Okay, tell us about that.
Black Elk spoke in Lakota. His son, Ben Black Elk, translated. But the person who actually wrote the book, who structured it, edited it, was John G. Neihardt.
A white American poet. He had a Lakota name, Flaming Rainbow, given to him.
That's right. And that immediately brings in an editorial filter. Neihardt wasn't just a passive scribe. He was an author, a poet, with his own perspective, his own goals for the book.
So scholars question the accuracy, suggesting Neihardt might have changed things.
The argument isn't necessarily that Black Elk wasn't truthful, but that Neihardt might have, consciously or unconsciously, exaggerated or altered parts of the story. Maybe to fit his own literary vision, or perhaps to resonate better with a white audience in the 1930s.
An audience that might have been looking for a certain kind of narrative, maybe a tragic, romanticized one about the vanishing Indian.
That's a strong possibility. Neihardt might not have fully grasped the Lakota cultural context for some things, or he might have emphasized certain aspects over others for dramatic effect.
Is there evidence of this? Specific examples of filtering?
Well, the most telling contrast comes when you compare the 1932 book to the original transcripts of Neihardt's interviews with Black Elk. Those were published much, much later in the 1980s under the title The Sixth Grandfather.
And what do those transcripts show?
They show a more complex picture. For instance, Black Elk speaks much more in the transcripts about his later life, including his conversion to Catholicism and how he integrated or struggled to integrate these different spiritual paths.
That's not really in Black Elk Speaks, is it?
Not prominently. Neihardt essentially shapes the narrative to end with Black Elk on the hill at Wounded Knee, lamenting the failure of his great vision, the nation's hoop being broken. It creates this incredibly powerful, tragic ending.
The end of a world feeling. Final.
Exactly. It fits that dying race narrative perfectly, which, frankly, sold books. But it potentially downplays the ongoing spiritual life, the adaptation, the resilience that Black Elk himself continued to live.
So Neihardt prioritized a certain kind of spiritual tragedy, maybe sacrificing some of the complexity of Black Elk's actual ongoing life and faith.
It seems that way. It really underscores that history, especially when crossing cultures and languages, is rarely objective. It's filtered. It's constructed.
And this isn't just about one book, is it? This problem of perspective, of bias, it runs through a lot of Western historical accounts of indigenous people.
Oh, absolutely. It's systemic. You see it in the very language used. The word choices often minimize indigenous agency and legitimize colonial actions.
Give us some examples of that kind of loaded language we should watch out for.
Think about how resistance is framed. When colonists fight against their rulers, it's often called a revolution, right? It sounds legitimate, political.
Sure.
But when Native Americans resist colonial invasion or broken treaties, historically it's often described as a revolt, an uprising, or even just a quarrel. The language itself diminishes the act.
Making it sound smaller, less organized, maybe irrational.
Precisely. Or consider the classic phrase that America was discovered. Discovered by whom? For whom? It completely ignores the millions of people already living here. More accurate words might be invaded, conquered, colonized.
Choosing discovered centers the European perspective and erases the indigenous one.
It does. And this consistent narrative framing serves a purpose. It often works to paint native populations as, quote, insignificant, brutish, and primitive.
And if you establish that narrative,
then it provides a justification, a rationale for taking land, for forced assimilation, for exerting political control. It makes those actions seem necessary, even benevolent.
So as readers, as listeners, we have to be really active in questioning the sources and actively seeking out other perspectives.
We absolutely must. We need to look beyond the dominant written record, which is often skewed. We need to consider oral traditions, ritual practices, material culture, things like art and architecture, which can offer different, often more authentic viewpoints.
That's a perfect transition, actually.
Yeah.
Because this challenge of holding on to identity, of finding a path forward against overwhelming pressure, that's where these prophetic figures become so crucial.
Yes. They often emerge in moments of extreme crisis.
And you mentioned Handsome Lake earlier. This is where things get really fascinated with these adaptation movements, right? The Seneca Prophet and the Gaiwi.io.
Handsome Lake, or Ganyo Dayo. His movement, often called the Longhouse religion, starts right around the turn of the 19th century, maybe 1797, 1799, and his personal story is key.
What was his background?
He came from a place of deep despair, really. Like many Iroquois at the time, his community was devastated after the American Revolution. They'd lost vast amounts of land, the traditional ways were disrupted, alcoholism was rampant, poverty was widespread. Handsome Lake himself suffered from alcoholism and lived in poverty.
And then he had a profound experience.
Yes, the sources say he fell into a trance, almost like death. for hours, maybe even days. When he recovered, he announced he'd received revelations from messengers sent by the great creator.
And this changed him completely.
It did. He immediately stopped drinking, which was a huge statement in itself, and began preaching a new code of conduct, a new way of life. This message became the Gaiwi.io, the good message.
What made it so powerful? Was it purely traditional?
No, and that's the genius of it, in a way. It was deeply rooted in traditional Iroquois beliefs, reverence for the creator, the importance of the spirit world, animism, but it wasn't static. It was a conscious blend.
Blending with what?
It incorporated elements from the world around them. You can see influences from the Quakers, who were active in the area and had a strong ethical code, and also the general religious excitement of the Second Great Awakening happening in America at the time.
So it was trying to find a path that felt authentic. An old way, but one that could actually work in their current, drastically changed circumstances.
Exactly. It was a survival mechanism presented as divine revelation. His teachings, initially passed down orally, laid out a strict moral code aimed at tackling the social problems tearing the community apart.
What kind of things did the code address?
It strongly condemned things like quarreling, witchcraft, spousal abuse, abortion, malicious gossip, and critically, it forbade selling any more land to the whites. It focused on internal reform and strengthening the community from within.
That sounds quite nativist, focused on resisting outside corruption. But you also mentioned adaptation. Did it allow for adopting any white practices?
Yes, and this is where it gets really pragmatic. Handsome Lake understood that absolute rejection of everything external might lead to starvation or further decline. So the code made specific allowances for adopting certain material practices, but with a crucial condition. They had to be done without pride or excessive attachment.
Okay, what were those allowances?
3 main things. First, cultivating the ground, encouraging settled agriculture for reliable food, shifting away from the increasingly difficult reliance on hunting. Second, building a sturdy, warm house, promoting family health and stability. And third, keeping livestock again for stability, but with the strict rule that the animals must be treated kindly, not abused.
So material changes were okay if they supported the core values of family, health, and community stability, preventing the kind of poverty that leads to cultural breakdown.
Precisely. It was a spiritual framework designed to address a pressing socioeconomic crisis, a very savvy adaptation.
But being an oral tradition initially, that must have led to problems. Disagreements about what the code actually said.
It absolutely did. Different preachers, the holders of the Gaiwi.io, started interpreting things differently, leading to disputes and divergence.
Which, ironically, pushed them towards using a tool of the colonizers they were trying to resist.
The written word? Yes. To create a standard, an orthodox version, Chief John Jacket wrote down the correct code in the Seneca language back in the 1860s.
And that settled it.
For a while. But then, tragically, that original written document was lost. So around 1903, another chief, Edward Corn Planter, painstakingly rewrote the entire code from memory. He feared that relying solely on oral transmission again would lead to the same fragmentation and potential loss of the original message. It just shows the constant effort needed to preserve spiritual integrity.
Wow. Now, besides the moral code, didn't Handsome Lake's movement also cause some internal conflict, particularly with existing traditions?
Oh, yes. Big time. Initially, Handsome Lake took a hard line against the traditional medicine societies. These were powerful, long-standing groups focused on healing and ritual.
He saw them as rivals, or as witches.
He branded their members as witches and actively persecuted them, demanding they disband and destroy their sacred objects. He ordered them to perform a specific ritual dissolution involving throwing tobacco into the fire.
Did they obey?
Well, the sources say the chiefs generally complied with the prophet's orders publicly. But crucially, many of them deliberately omitted the specific, necessary tobacco-throwing ceremony when they supposedly disbanded the societies.
Ah, loophole. And what did that mean ritually?
It meant, according to the society members, that the dissolution wasn't done correctly. It was incomplete, ritually illegal, so they refused to truly disband. They declared the prophet's order illegitimate in that sense.
And just went underground.
Exactly. They continued practicing their healing rituals in secret for decades, hidden from the more conservative followers of the Longhouse religion and also from white authorities or researchers.
That shows incredible dedication to those older healing ways, even facing pressure from within their own community.
It really does. But they didn't stay hidden forever. This is another example of that resilience and adaptation.
How so?
Because those healing practices were so deeply ingrained, so necessary for the community's well-being. Over time, as the Longhouse religion itself became more established and perhaps less rigid, the once forbidden societies, like the famous false faces, gradually re-emerged.
And their rituals were eventually accepted back into the fold.
Yes, they blended back in. Their essential functions, especially around healing and dealing with certain kinds of spiritual afflictions, were too important to lose. It became a kind of necessary syncretism, ensuring the overall spiritual health of the community took precedence over strict adherence to Handsome Lake's initial prohibitions.
That blending seems key. Now, shifting back to the Lakota context for a moment, we see a similar reliance on personal, world-shaking visions with Black Elk, don't we?
Absolutely. Black Elk's great vision, where he sees himself as the sixth grandfather, is profoundly personal but also carries immense collective weight.
The sixth grandfather
Representing the earth and all of humankind. It connects his personal destiny directly to the fate of his people and, in a sense, all creation. It's a colossal spiritual responsibility placed upon him.
Especially during such a desperate time for the Lakota.
Exactly. That vision, along with his deep involvement in the ghost dance movement, another spiritual response to crisis, offered a powerful source of hope, identity, and spiritual resistance against what must have felt like impending annihilation.
So if we look at Handsome Lake and Black Elk together, despite their different cultures and specific messages, there's a common thread.
I think so. Both figures emerged during periods of profound cultural trauma and existential threat, and both offer a spiritually grounded path forward, one through a structured moral code blending old and new, the other through cosmic vision and traditional ceremony. They provide frameworks for making sense of suffering and maintaining identity.
Frameworks for survival. Okay, let's build on that idea of structure. Moving from individual prophets to the collective. The Iroquois Confederacy, the League of the Haudenosaunee. Its strength wasn't just military or political, was it? It was deeply tied to its social and spiritual organization.
Definitely. Many Western observers at the time were amazed by the League's political sophistication, and the absolute foundation of that was its unique social structure built around the matrilineal family.
Matrilineal meaning descent and identity traced through the mother's line.
Entirely. The head of the fundamental unit, the Longhouse family, was the matron, the eldest woman. She held significant social and economic power, inheritance, property, even clan identity, passed down through the female line.
How did that translate into actual political power for women? It sounds radical compared to European systems of the time.
It gave them fundamental authority. While men typically served as the public speakers, the chiefs, the war leaders, it was the women, specifically the clan matrons, who held the real power behind the scenes.
In what way?
They selected the 50 hereditary peace chiefs, the sachems, who governed the League. And crucially, they held the power to dehorn or depose a chief if he failed in his duties or acted against the interests of the people or the constitution of the League.
So the ultimate authority rested with the women.
In many crucial respects, yes. And this kinship system, where clans cut across tribal lines, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and later the Tuscarora joined, created powerful bonds of solidarity that held the Confederacy together.
And the League itself was conceptualized as a longhouse, right? Geographically and symbolically.
Exactly. The Onondaga, located centrally, were the keepers of the council fire, the symbolic heart. The Mohawk guarded the eastern door, the Seneca protected the western door. It was a unified political and spiritual entity across a vast territory, mirroring the structure of their homes.
And underpinning this sophisticated governance was the core of their traditional religious focus.
Well, they certainly revered a great creator, a supreme being. But much of their day-to-day ritual life centered on ensuring fertility of the land, of the people, and maintaining health. It was very much an animistic worldview.
Animistic meaning seeing spirit in the natural world.
Yes. Crops weren't just plants. Corn, beans, and squash were venerated as the three sisters, spiritual beings who sustained life. Trees held spiritual significance, the sacred world tree representing peace and unity for the League. Wood itself was sacred.
Which connects back to those medicine societies, like the False Faces, who were so focused on health and healing, using natural materials like wood.
Precisely. That reverence for the natural world, for the spirits inhabiting it, translated directly into their healing practices. The medicine societies were specialists in dealing with the spiritual causes of illness.
Let's dive into the False Faces a bit more. They seem really central and enduring.
They are. The False Face Society is still active and remains incredibly important. Their primary role is healing and, you could say, exorcism. They propitiate or appease powerful spirits associated with wind and disease, the Hodovan.
Beings that were greatly feared.
Yes, because they were believed to cause specific, often debilitating illnesses, particularly affecting the head, face, joints. Things like strokes, paralysis, eye problems, toothaches were often attributed to the Hodovan.
And how did someone become involved with the society, either as a member or someone needing treatment?
Often through dreams. If someone dreamed of the Hodovan or had persistent symptoms associated with the false face sickness, it might indicate they needed the society's help, or even that they were destined to become a member.
And their power comes directly from the masks and the rituals, right? Tell us about the masks themselves.
The masks are the power, in many ways. They're traditionally carved from wood, sometimes corn husk is used too. And the original process was deeply sacred. A carver wouldn't just grab any piece of wood. They'd seek out a specific living tree, often basswood, willow, or maple. They'd offer sacred tobacco, speak to the tree's spirit, and then begin carving the face directly into the living trunk.
Wow. Carving it while it was still part of the tree.
Yes. Only when the basic form was complete would the block be cut away. This process was believed to imbue the mask with the living spirit, the power of the tree itself.
That ancient method isn't really used anymore, is it?
It's largely obsolete now, for practical reasons, but the style and the intent remain. Carvers follow traditional Iroquois forms, and the goal isn't realism or beauty in a conventional sense.
The source said the more hideous, the better. Why that aesthetic?
Because the hideousness, the exaggerated, sometimes distorted features, represent the immense power and ancient nature of the Hodovan spirits themselves. When a society member puts on the mask,
They become the spirit.
they act as if they are the spirit. They relinquish their own identity. The mask transforms them, allowing them to embody that supernatural power. And interestingly, the sources note this masking also provides a kind of psychological release, allowing the wearer to express himself more freely within the ritual context.
The sort of sanctioned chaos.
Something like that. And their ceremonies are both private, for healing individuals, and public.
What happens in the public ceremonies?
3 times a year. In spring and fall, they conduct house-to-house visits across the reservation. They wear the masks, dress in ragged clothes, sometimes stuffed with noisy things like tin pans, carry turtle shell or horn rattles.
Quite a sight, I imagine.
Definitely. They dance, stir the ashes in the hearth, and blow or sprinkle those hot ashes over the sick, or even just the inhabitants of the house, symbolically cleansing the home, driving out illness and bad influences.
And they're compensated for this.
Yes, traditionally with offerings of tobacco and corn mush. Their third public appearance is during the Midwinter or New Year's festival, where they specifically petition the Hodovan spirits to remove all sickness carried over from the past year.
It's fascinating that even Iroquois, who converted to Christianity, often still turn to the false faces if Western medicine failed them.
It shows the deep, persistent belief in the efficacy of these traditional healing systems. It's that pragmatic, play-it-safe approach, perhaps accessing whatever power might bring healing. You see a similar pragmatism and deep spiritual structure in their customs around death.
Right. The outline mentioned specific mourning practices affirmed by Handsome Lake.
Yes, the Iroquois recognized life is finite, but they had structured ways to process grief. The intense mourning period was strictly limited.
How long?
10 days. After 10 days, the overt grieving had to cease. This was followed by a communal ceremony called the Dead Feast.
What was the belief behind that?
The belief was that the soul of the deceased actually returned to partake in this feast with the living. The ritual, which Handsome Lake's revelations confirmed as true and good, was designed to comfort the departed soul and, crucially, to prevent the living from becoming overwhelmed by sorrow. Excessive, prolonged grief was thought to burden the dead and paralyze the living community.
A way to ensure life goes on for both the living and the departed spirit. An inheritance followed that matrilineal line too.
Historically, yes. Property would revert to the deceased's nearest kin on the mother's side, within the clan structure, not necessarily to their spouse or children if they belonged to a different clan.
Okay, let's make a big shift now, geographically and environmentally. From the forests of the Northeast to the arid landscapes of the American Southwest and the Pueblo peoples. Here, spirituality seems utterly woven into the land itself.
It absolutely is. The mountains, the mesas, the canyons, they aren't just scenery. They are, as the sources put it, a living archive, a repository of cultural memory and sacred history. Think of the Zuni relationship with Doyalan, Corn Mountain. It's central to their origin stories, their identity.
And this deep connection to place must have fueled their resistance against the Spanish colonizers.
Immensely. It gave their fight a profound spiritual dimension. They weren't just defending territory, they were defending their sacred origins, their entire cosmology.
Which brings us to the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, a truly remarkable event.
It really was. What's staggering is the coordination involved. You had numerous distinct Pueblo groups scattered across a wide area, speaking at least 6 different languages.
Languages that weren't mutually intelligible.
Correct. Yet they managed to plan and execute a synchronized uprising.
How? Who led it?
The main organizer is generally identified as Pope, a Tiwa medicine man from Pueblo. And he used a brilliant, low-tech communication system to bypass the language barriers and maintain secrecy.
The knotted rope you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. He sent runners out to the various pueblos carrying ropes with a specific number of knots tied in them. Each knot represented 1 day remaining until the planned revolt. Every morning, the leaders in each pueblo would untie 1 knot. When the last knot was untied...
It was time. Everyone rises up together.
Precisely. It ensured unity of action across linguistic divides. And their goal was clear. Expel the Spanish missionaries and colonists completely. And for 12 years, they succeeded. They achieved freedom.
That resistance, that assertion of identity, we can actually see it physically, right, in their architecture.
Yes, particularly in the relationship between their traditional sacred structures, the kivas, and the churches imposed by the Spanish.
Tell us about the kivas first.
Kivas are fundamental to Pueblo ceremonial life. They're often subterranean or semi-subterranean, symbolizing the people's emergence from the underworld, the womb of the earth. They have specific features, like a fire pit, a ventilation shaft, and often a small hole in the floor called a sipapu, representing the emergence point itself.
And their orientation matters.
Critically, they are typically oriented along a north-south axis, which is understood to align with the path of spirits, the connection to the sacred world. And traditionally, they were primarily spaces for men's ceremonies and societies.
So how did the Spanish try to co-opt this sacred architecture?
Well, it seems the missionaries recognized the deep significance of these spaces. When they forced the Pueblo people to build Catholic churches, they sometimes deliberately incorporated certain Puebloan architectural or symbolic elements.
Like what?
Like building the churches along that same north-south axis, or maintaining a somewhat dark, enclosed interior space that might evoke the womb-like feeling of the kiva.
Trying to make the church feel familiar, less alien.
Perhaps. The idea might have been to create a fusion, a space where Pueblo people could, in theory, practice their own rituals under the guise of Catholic worship, thereby subtly subverting the colonial imposition while outwardly conforming.
But that attempt at syncretism, at fusion, was ultimately rejected, wasn't it?
Emphatically rejected. During the Pueblo Revolt, the churches became primary targets.
Why the churches specifically?
Because they were the most potent symbols of Spanish colonial power and religious oppression. And remember, Pueblo people had been forced through harsh labor practices to build these very structures. So the act of destroying them, looting them, burning them, letting them decay was deeply symbolic.
A reclamation of power, a physical rejection of the imposed system.
Exactly. It wasn't just random destruction. It was a targeted statement against the hands that had forced their construction and the ideology they represented.
And we see a parallel story unfolding in their pottery, right?
Yep.
Ceramics as another site of resistance and identity assertion.
Yes. The designs on pottery changed dramatically in relation to the Spanish presence and the revolt. It becomes a kind of visual record of their struggle and revitalization.
How so? What were ceramics like before the revolt?
Designs often included representations of kakinas, the spirit beings who act as intermediaries between humans and the gods. But these were usually placed on the interior of bowls.
Hidden from public view. Intended for private ceremonial use.
That seems to be the case. The outward-facing designs might have been more geometric or abstract, perhaps less spiritually explicit in a way that outsiders could interpret or suppress.
But after the revolt, during that period of independence, the art becomes more public, more political.
Absolutely. There's a clear revitalization movement in pottery design, and one of the most striking changes is the deliberate removal of Spanish motifs.
Like the cross.
Especially the cross. For the Spanish, it's the ultimate symbol of their faith. But for the Pueblo people, it had become synonymous with forced conversion, violence, and the entire oppressive colonial system. Taking it off their pottery was a powerful statement.
And what did they replace it with? What designs came to the forefront?
They consciously revived older, traditional Pueblo designs, things that signify their own heritage and worldview. You start seeing bold depictions of birds, intricate feather patterns, and specific archaic motifs like hooked triangles becoming prominent on the exterior of pots.
Making these symbols of their own tradition visible. Public declarations.
Precisely. It was an indexical sign, a visual marker of their renewed commitment to their ancestral ways, and a rejection of foreign domination. It helped forge and display a unified pan-Pueblo identity in the wake of the revolt. The pottery wasn't just decorative, it was an active part of reshaping their society, a tool for communicating power and resistance.
Wow. So, looking across these different nations, the Lakota, the Iroquois, the Pueblo, and considering the challenges with sources like Neihart's book, the adaptations of prophets like Handsome Lake, the resilience of the Iroquois structure, the resistance coded into Pueblo art, what's the big picture? What defines Native North American faith when you pull all this together?
I think the defining characteristic isn't stasis. It's not about being frozen in time. It's about continuous, dynamic adaptation. That's the key takeaway.
Adaptation as the core strength.
Yes. Whether it's a prophet like Handsome Lake, creating a new moral code that blends old and new to keep his community from dissolving, or it's secret societies like the False Faces, keeping vital healing traditions alive underground when persecuted, or it's Pueblo potters using ancient symbols as a form of political speech.
They found ways to bend without breaking.
Exactly. The underlying spiritual structures, the core beliefs about balance, spirit, community, and the sacredness of the world, they proved incredibly resilient. They were able to absorb enormous shocks, whether from disease, warfare, displacement, or forced assimilation, without completely shattering. They adapted, they evolved, they incorporated, they resisted.
Which highlights this ongoing tension, doesn't it? Between what scholars sometimes call nativism, that conscious effort to return to and preserve traditional culture, language, ceremonies, and acculturation, the often unavoidable process of adopting elements from the dominant culture, especially for economic survival.
That push and pull is absolutely central. Modern Native communities continue to navigate that complex balancing act. How do you maintain spiritual and cultural integrity? How do you hold on to language and traditional governance while also participating in a modern, globalized world? It's a continuation of the adaptive processes we've been discussing.
And that struggle against corrosive outside influences, it has deep historical roots in their own understanding, doesn't it? Thinking back to Handsome Lake.
You're thinking of his revelation about the source of the white man's corrupting influence.
Exactly. The idea that the evil spirit, Hanasiono, didn't just bring abstract evil, but gave the white man very specific tools designed to destroy the Iroquois way of life.
Yes, the reverse creation story, in a sense. Hanasiono, the evil twin, deliberately equipped the Europeans with 5 specific things. The goal was to make the Iroquois barter their country and forget their laws.
And those 5 things were?
Rum, playing cards, money, a violin representing frivolous entertainment that distracted from duty and disease. These weren't random evils. They were seen as engineered temptations, material lures designed to foster addiction, gambling, greed, idleness, and sickness, thereby weakening the people spiritually and socially.
So the greatest danger wasn't necessarily military might, but the internal erosion caused by these specific vices introduced from the outside.
That's the core of that particular teaching. It located the profoundest evil not in some distant spiritual battle, but in the tangible, manufactured temptations of the modern world that pull people away from tradition, community, and responsibility.
Which leaves us with a really powerful, kind of unsettling final thought for you, our listeners, to consider. If rum, cards, money, music for distraction, and disease were identified back then as the specific engineered tools eroding cultural identity and spiritual balance, what are the modern 5 things? What are the contemporary, perhaps digital or consumerist lures in our world today that might be subtly encouraging us to, as Handsome Lake feared, forget our laws, disconnect from community, and barter away things of real value?
Thanks for tuning into Sonara's Deep Dive. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our future episodes. I bring you fresh content every week. Thanks for listening.